Hi, I'm Rocket. Welcome to another Whiteboarding with Rocket. In this session, I'm going to talk you through the network setup of Airship Studios for the January event that we ran. And this is what is in place now. There will be future versions of this where I'll talk about how we're going to evolve it and how we're going to address some of the gaps. I will cover a lot of those gaps. Today, what we have is a firewall gateway that is run by the facilities of Airship. So it is not something that's in the building of the studio. And they are running that in gateway mode. That connects into a router, and that router has physical connections to Wi-Fi, and then has a connection into Elad Studio, Neil's Studio, and the live room. This was sufficient for us to get started. So when we went to hook up the OH gear, what we ended up doing was running a physical connection from Elad Studio, which is right above the server room, down into the server room, and that became the UDM Pro connection. So the UDM Pro goes into this switch that's in Elad's Studio, which goes out to this router, goes through the firewall gateway and out to the internet. So that's how that connectivity works. We then needed to get connectivity to the live room from the UDM Pro in the server room. And so this is when we ran the 10 strands of SDI. We also ran 4 strands of Dante. And 2 of those strands are for, not for Dante, 2 strands for C2, command and control, and 2 for Dante. And that's primary and backup, just think of it that way. And we ran that through Neil's Studio, and that was quite the endeavor. Now we also needed to make sure that Elad's Pro Tools rig got connected into the Dante network in the live room. And it's fortunate that there was already a network connection in place. We were able to repurpose that, and that allowed him to connect into the inner monitor system, the Aviom Dante-enabled system that they upgraded recently. So that's working out really well. We've got a pretty solid connection here, so it doesn't rely on anything happening here. That is an assumption we're going to be testing soon. So what I wanted to make sure of is if I needed to power down the equipment in the rack in the server room, that it would not take his connectivity out. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the live room itself. So these connections come in and we have a C2 network hub there. It is a PoE switch, and it has connectivity out to a PTZ camera, to a Stream Deck. It also has a connection into the X32 control side of things. And then we have the Dante network, and off of that we have the X32 Dante and the Aviom Dante-enabled in-ear monitor system. So this all works out pretty nicely. Now when it comes to the internet connections between these devices and remote operators such as Marcia, this gets a little bit more complex. One of the constraints is the Airship router is not on the internet as a public IP address. Now, whether it's a static IP address or a DHCP issued address from the provider, it doesn't really matter. It just needs to be considered a public IP address. Otherwise, you have to spend a bunch of time setting up port forwarding and doing a bunch of things, and we didn't have access to the equipment. We also didn't want to approach the facilities people and find out it's going to cost a bunch of money to make those changes, especially as we were experimenting and we figured out a workaround for the show. So how does this work? Well, in my studio, I have a UDM Pro that has a bridge mode IP address, public IP address. I set it up as the hub using Unify's Site Magic, and I connected the UX7 that we sent to Marcia and the Airship UDM Pro to it as spokes. Now, any traffic that flows from like the 1ME panel connected into here goes through my studio and gets routed out to the Airship network. That's not ideal. It's a single point of failure. It adds complexity. The thing is, it worked. And it worked just fine this time, but it's not a long-term thing. And this is a much simpler picture of that here. So you've got Marcia out here with her panel. She has to go through my network into Airship. And what's nice is there's settings in Site Magic that allows you to make it routable. So each of the hubs, each of the spokes can talk to each other. There's an option for that. And then there's an option to make sure you can leverage if your CIDR ranges in each of the locations aren't overlapping, you don't have to build an intermediary network, which adds yet another level of complexity. And in this case, we were able to set it all up so they did not have overlapping IP address CIDR ranges. Now let's talk a little bit about the gaps in the RFIs. Talked a little bit about this being a single point of failure, my setup. There's a couple of things that we need to do there. One, I would prefer to make the airship be the hub rather than the spoke, and then have things connect to it. That's more logical. And it's got a pretty good business account. The internet there is 1 gigabit up and down, so it's pretty decent. And then the other piece is if that's going to take a little bit of time, because I'm putting together a proposal to work with Airship team on updating the network a bit. If that takes a little bit of time, we could have a second UDM Pro be the hub. I'm working with Guy, and potentially we could leverage something there. And so in case power goes out at my place, we have a backup route, which, there we go. The Wi-Fi in Airship was pretty flaky during the show. We had a lot of comms going over it, and we were just getting random dropouts. It's not the greatest Wi-Fi. It works, but it's definitely in need of an upgrade. So that's part of the proposal I'll be putting together to talk about how to get that to studio grade Wi-Fi. And of course, the Unify Wi-Fi is pretty darn good. The Dante backup. So we have only one Dante network right now, and getting a secondary Dante network I think is pretty important if they're going to continue to rely on it for all of the musicians that come through. And so the idea would be to take the dumb PoE switches that are in place now. We're just using some Netgear, just straight switches that aren't managed. And it's decent for now, but as we get more and more Dante devices on that network, probably going to want to have something managed. So the idea would be get some of the Dante AV switches in there and make that the primary. So to be determined, and probably over the next 6 months. The remote operators, how we would connect more additional remote operators. Let's say Talalik wants to come in and do lights. Let's say Guy want to come in and do some PTZ. We want to have Mickey come in and help out with some of the audio side. How would they do that connectivity? We could do it a number of different ways. My thought was to put in either, well, first of all, we want to get the Airship being the hub. And if that's the case, we can put in things like OpenVPN server. We could do all, there's a lot of different options that open up once the UDM Pro is the primary device at Airship and has a public IP address. And at that point, we could do all sorts of different things. We got the double NAT situation. I've talked about that extensively in previous videos. That's right here where we've got the gateway firewall coming into a router and then coming into the UDM Pro. And that just creates a lot of constraint around what you can do. You have to spend a bunch of time figuring out port forwarding across these two different devices, and it's not fun. And with the limited time that I put upon myself, let me just be clear about that, I decided that this setting up the hub at my studio was faster, expedient, and worked. But we definitely want to move to a place where it becomes the hub. And then this whole network complexity, the physical connections here, they're not ideal. And so if there was an opportunity to run a few extra fiber connections or Cat6e connections, I would love to take advantage of it just so that we have better coverage. Right now it's a very point-to-point, to Elod's room down to the server room. I'd rather run something directly from where the router comes in to the server room and then make the server room the place where everything branches out. To be determined. Definitely we'll be thinking about that as we go. All right, the network side of the things, the IT side of the stuff, it can always be a pain, especially with Dante. I'm glad we got through this. Definitely a lot we can improve. But with that, I'm Rocket. This has been another Whiteboarding with Rocket.